Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another CEO Table Talk. My name is JT O'Donnell, founder and CEO of Work It Daily, and the host of today's show. We are going to be talking about CEO isolation, specifically within the business and the negative impact that it can have. And I think this is something for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO, if you're a manager, even if you're just an employee. If somebody in a leadership position is feeling truly isolated and having the impacts of it, which we're going to hear more today, it can affect the business deeply, which means it can affect you. So very timely topic. Can't wait. Please post your questions, your comments. We want to see a lot of activity from our guests today. But with that in mind, let me bring the stars of the show up. Hello, Kirsten, Mike, and Mark. Just a reminder, everyone, all three of these incredible executive coaches are also Vistage chairs, which means they on a regular monthly basis are coaching CEOs and business executives on topics just like this one. And, I just want to say to all three of you, I saw in advance what we're going to be talking about, and I'm just really, really excited about what you're bringing here. Folks, take notes. This is important. So with that in mind, Kirsten, I'm going to pick on you first because I was fascinated with how you talked about the fact that, every leader deals with isolation at all levels. Let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. To be a leader is to be isolated. Leaders are constantly surrounded by people at work, their companies, yet they don't really belong anywhere, truly. That said, an isolated leader is a dangerous leader. Leaders can be isolated in many different ways. No isolation is the same, and yet each is unique and has negative consequences both for the leader and for the company and its employees. They can be isolated from their employees. They can be isolated from reality. They could be socially isolated. They could be intellectually isolated. A leader could be isolated from their employees and be really unaware of the real issues or experiences of their employees in their company. For example, a leader may think they have a great culture. They've really been focusing on this culture and then struggle to understand why they have a huge turnover issue. That would be isolation. A leader could be isolated from reality. They could spend so much time in their business. And as Vistage coaches, we know what this means. They're working on minutia. They are micromanaging a team. They're not looking around corners or paying attention to the market. That business is going to become outdated and irrelevant. And that is an isolation issue. The socially isolated leaders, they are lonely. They may even be depressed. They don't have a true group to belong to. Those relationships at work are truly clouded by that authority imbalance. At any point in time, you may have to fire a friend, and that puts a damper on a relationship. A leader could also be isolated intellectually. That pressure to perform, to always be on, results in us placing our own professional development last. I did this for so long, and we can isolate ourselves from growing. If we are stunting ourselves from growing as leaders, then our effectiveness goes down. We must find peers as leaders outside the company, safe containers to test our assumptions and validate our ideas. There will always be isolation for leaders, but it does not have to be debilitating.
I love that. And we're already seeing validation from our audience. One LinkedIn user is saying, I fully agree. Most leaders have a sense of self-isolation and loneliness.
Yes.
Myself as a CEO for many years, absolutely. The isolation can be crippling at times. And I'm curious, Kirsten, how much worse do you think this has gotten as a result of COVID when CEOs were physically isolated from their businesses?
Yes, I think it's exacerbated a lot. And I think it's some underlying reasons why we see so many CEOs wanting a return to office. It's because they need that physical connection, and they haven't quite figured out how to get it other ways.
Yeah,
And it's important to their role is to connect with people.
I agree. I saw a stat that you posted this week. Only 28% of remote workers are feeling actually connected to the business and the mission. And then it was like 33% of the in-person are connected. I mean, those numbers are super low, which is pretty scary. And that kind of shifts me down to you, Mike Thorne, because you were talking about this idea that sort of a sign of isolation is when the CEO or executive saying like, they don't get it. They just don't get it. Like there's a disconnect between the CEO and them. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think isolation at the top is the loneliest path of all, but it's what people choose, unfortunately. So if you're two types of leaders, one who started the company, so they have subject matter expertise, they come in, they start expanding the business, and they have a hard time deferring to everybody else. So they get very frustrated. Why don't people get it? Why don't they understand? Why aren't they doing what I'm asking? So the pressure builds and builds and builds, and they're not getting any feedback because people typically are just going to defer to whatever they're saying to go do, and they're just going to be compliant to what he's asking for, which will then drive innovation down and probably lead to a lot of distrust and also losing reality on the ground. And then you have the other person who comes in who's taking over as a leader of a business, also a subject matter expertise, but thinks they know everything, and they come in and start to implement their own ideas on a business that already exists and a culture that exists. And they start having a lot of distrust because they don't empower anybody. And ultimately, in both cases, you really drive down innovation and feedback and the performance of the business.
It's so interesting you say that. We have a really cool comment here from Lori. And she said, we have to change the way we see leadership. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being the midwife for your business. What do you think about that, Mike?
I'd like to understand what she means by that.
Yeah.
You need to understand a midwife.
Yeah, the term of a midwife, right? Like supportive, like do you think that the CEOs that you deal with, they have to be confident, they have to be, look like they know the answers and are steering the ship and have the vision, but at the same time, is that also contributing to their isolation, this feeling, this bravado almost?
Yeah, because they're confident in what they know, and a lot of times the business has grown, expanded, and the things that are happening in the business that they're not super aware of and they don't ask because they're afraid. Back to what you just said, where if I asked, I'm going to act like I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm the CEO. So yes, they're confident in what they know, but they're just not willing to open themselves up to that kind of feedback and perspective. And from the work I've done both as the CEO and also working with CEOs, the minute they start asking those questions and start opening up versus trying to have the answers, it's astounding how much employees know what to do and what's going on, all the way to the person who's packing boxes, answering phones. They're the ones on the front lines. They know exactly what the business needs. And quite honestly, if you have a really good business owner, someone who started the company, the employees that were there at the beginning or near the beginning, I was one of the first 10 employees of a company, a startup one time. Your ultimate goal is to help that CEO win and the company win. And we had a situation one time where the CEO said, hey, we got a huge problem. We can't process orders. The systems are down. I need everyone's help. And he sent everyone to the warehouse, including his wife, to pack boxes and ship. And he said, Mike, can you stay back at the office as the head of sales and just take the phone calls to explain to clients what's happening? We'll make sure they get their product. In his case, he had the trust of the employees, but most often CEOs don't even ask the questions, don't even realize that the people on the grounds of the business really know what's going on, what to do. You just got to ask for the help.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Mark, bouncing over to you, you've dealt with this firsthand. I think, and it's got to be what makes you so powerful as a CEO coach. Tell us a little bit about your journey with isolation.
Yeah, I'd love to, but I want to go back to what Lori, because Lori clarified in the comments section what she meant about midwifing. And it's the understanding that your business is a living being rather than a system. And I think that's a very great comment, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. For me, so the problem of isolation, it started in an instant. One day, I'm an employee, and the next, I'm an isolated CEO. I quit a job to voluntarily go down a path all alone and not sure what's in front of me. And my personality, like most founders, it has curiosity and risk taking. And there's probably a bit of courage, but naivete can alleviate the need for courage. What's the worst that can happen? I can lose my house. Who cares? But as you go down the founder's path, that isolation builds. And along the growing isolation comes growing problems. And the funny, or maybe not so funny thing about problems is they grow in number and in consequence. That always impending failure has a larger and larger impact, not just on your life, but the lives of the employees and clients and vendors that count on you. So what goes from the worst thing that can happen is I lose my house becomes that same problem for countless others who need you to perform. That isolation just builds. And solving that isolation problem for those of us willing to admit that isolation is real and was actually quite simple to solve, I joined a Vistage peer group. And after attending a few of these monthly meetings, I learned how to be open, honest, and vulnerable. And I don't want to trivialize the act of becoming open, honest, and vulnerable. But when I did, the isolation relief came bit by bit. And yeah, it's just a bit of relief, but doing it month after month, and for me, 12 years, provided that cumulative relief to ride that scary wave, that very isolating, scary wave that felt like it was going to come crashing down upon me at any moment. And with that sense of relief in the peer group, I learned what was necessary to grow the company and take care of everyone that was counting on me. And I think that Mike and Kirsten so perfectly articulated all of these things that need to be executed and need to be learned to perform.
That's really fascinating. And, Mark, I want to follow up by Michael posed a question and tell me what you think this is. He said, is CEO isolation a symptom or a cause? And could it result from a dysfunctional organization and structure rather than the primary issue? What do you think about that?
Well, certainly I will absolutely say that a dysfunctional organizational structure can be the primary issue, but I believe that isolation is inherent in the job. And so I guess it's a symptom. There's nobody to talk to. And you can't avoid that unless you find those people you can talk to. And the employees, yes, you can talk with them, but they will never understand nor care, in a certain sense, the pressures that you're under.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's really fascinating. Folks, we're talking about CEO isolation, its impact on the business, specifically its negative impact on the business. We're here today with three amazing Vistage chairs. They all are CEO coaches on a daily basis here talking about a very real issue. Please post your questions and comments. We'd love to share them with them. I want to go around and ask each of you, though, a question that I think that comes up a lot, which is how can a CEO what are some of the warning signs that they should pay attention to that isolation is negatively impacting the business? Can you cite something? Kirsten, I'm going to pick on you first. What's a warning symbol they should be paying attention to?
Yeah, the first one that popped into my head, a warning sign that you may be suffering from isolation, is when your assumptions about the company and you are stating these assumptions in, you say, a leadership team or a meeting are not validated. You are saying and thinking things about the company and people are discounting them or saying, well, that's not how it is. That's not true. Right. So that is one sign that you are in one way isolated, separated from what's actually happening in your company.
Yeah, that's a great one. Mike, you mentioned, that bravado, that disconnect of people coming in want to do their way. What else have you seen? And how do you call out someone and say, look, I think you might be a little isolated here?
Well, first and foremost, just sit in a meeting with your staff and see how they respond to you in the meeting. If they're just sort of, okay, there's not a lot of action or a lot of pushback or a lot of different conversations, that's probably the one glaring one. Because if you're having regular meetings, that would be the one that would stand out to me that I see a lot.
Interesting.
I think the second thing, though, that's part of Michael's question, what you just asked, though, I still believe, and this is something I experience a lot, and maybe it's just the people I work with or gravitate to the work I do, people live in their past and their history. And when they get stressful or when the business is growing and they're getting worried a lot, they get in their head and they start to panic a little bit. And that's when they go isolate because they're afraid to figure out what's really going on. I think if you can somehow get that out of your head, which means there's probably something that happened to you at some point in your life or career that forces you to go that way. That's an inner thing. You got to just ask yourself, what is it? What role am I playing in what's going on here? What role? I really believe at the gut level, people running companies, they're smart if they know. They just got to be willing to answer that question. What role am I playing?
I love that. What role? Really ownership, taking accountability.
Yeah.
Mark, when you were starting to realize, like, I loved how you talked about the pressure of, it's not just my house I can lose, like these other people. Do you think all leaders think that way though? Do you believe that all of them put this self-pressure and think that these employees are an extension of myself? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me carefully answer that. The companies that I want to work for are the ones where they do feel that pressure. And most of the CEOs that I have the honor of talking with or coaching, all of them, in fact, care deeply about their employees. And yeah, if it's not deep inside the leader, I think that you get disconnected and you get isolated. And I loved what Mike said is, how do you know? Well, if nobody's talking to you, it's not because you're a great leader, it's because you're an isolated leader.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, good way. Yeah, good way. I like that. Yeah.
Good point. So let's flip it around now. Again, I'm going to compliment Michael. He brought up a really interesting question. He said, what strategies can organizations implement to ensure the CEOs remain accessible to employees at all levels and maintain an accurate pulse on the company? So I'm almost thinking of this as the reverse, like managing up. What can people listening today who aren't a CEO but are recognizing their CEOs isolated, are there things they can do? How can they make this happen?
They can invite their CEO to things.
Interesting.
Right? Invite them. Get them to come out. So a CEO that's got a calendar that's full of meetings and things that have nothing to do with connecting inside the company, you've got to be spending 50% of your time, outside the company because you're looking around corners and all of that. But to be not isolating as a CEO, you've got to be spending time inside, up and down, and across your company. And that's going to be, you want it to look organic, but it's probably not organic. You have planned opportunities to go to the celebrations, to go to, the different activities that are across the company. And that if that's not coming from the CEO, then people need to start inviting the CEO or the leader who's isolated to those things. Pull them out, bring them to it, make it a positive experience.
So they can see it. I love it. What do you think? Oh, Mark, dive in there.
Yeah, I had the head of HR come into my office and say, Mark, you're a really scary guy. And you need to walk the halls. And we had this half-hour conversation, and she would put a note on my desk 3, 4, 5 times a week, go talk to this person about, not about work, but about their mother, their child, just communicate with them. And so, yeah, it was forced.
Yep.
And I received it with gratitude when she came in my office and said, I'm going to teach you how to get rid of the isolation. They loved it.
Yeah. That's amazing. Because I just want to comment, like, we do a lot of self-assessment of executives at Work It Daily, and a majority of them come out as what we call the commander type. And that they walk in the door, they check their emotions at the door because they're about getting performance. So it's very easy to become isolated in the attempt to do your job and do it well by missing out on those. It's such a great point. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a mindset shift to realize that actually is your job. And, I love, Mark, what you said. I used my executive assistant. She was amazing for that. She, arranged my schedule to make sure I was doing all of those important things and being in those places and knew where to go and what to do. And it completely changed the impression that I was making.
I love it. Mike, you led huge organization. How did you make sure that you weren't isolated?
Yeah, my guess is Kirsten and Mark are a little bit unique for CEOs. Most people don't want to do the work when they get told to do that. So kudos to both of you for doing it. No, I'm serious. Most people don't want to do the work. I think the one thing that is really important, and Eric Coriel, who does a lot of work on teams, collaborative teams and so on, talks about this idea of shared fate. And if everybody in the organization has a shared fate, I mean, just like in a sports team, or you're putting on a musical performance or a theater production, everybody knows what the end result needs to be. So everyone figures out what their role is and they're willing to work together to get there. I have just experienced both good and bad versions of that. It's easy if you're a public company in the sense that, okay, we are the stock, we got to keep going. So people can kind of see that as, quote, the shared fate. Oh, that's hard to manage for everybody. But finding the reason why we do what we do, a little example of that is Yankee Candle used to have a consumer profile and they named her Lisa. In every meeting we sat in, didn't matter what meeting was about, we had an empty chair in the room. And when decision making came down to what decision we want to make, it became almost a joke, but it was real. Like, what would Lisa think? And it permeated both the internal organization and the external environment, everything we did. And so whatever that shared fate is, that was ours. Everyone, so we got to think about what's Lisa looking for. And that became the mantra we used whenever we would create ideas, meetings, what have you. So I like that idea of some sort of shared fate is what I would say to answer your question, JT.
Yeah, I love that shared fate. That's a really cool concept. And the empty chair.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way you're going to forget to do that when there's literally a physical empty chair visually in the room, right?
Yeah.
Which is super cool. Let me ask you all this, because I'm kind of generalizing or summarizing some of the comments I'm seeing here. What do you do when the CEO is feeling, it's visible that the CEO is feeling taken advantage of, or just feeling like a lack of respect? And I say that because post-pandemic, I think there have been a lot of CEOs out there trying to navigate and figure out how to support people who have now said, look, work-life balance is my main priority. This job comes second, and so you're asking these CEOs to change their business models, change their leadership styles. You're asking them to change a lot all of a sudden, if that makes sense. And just seeing and hearing about more CEOs that are getting frustrated and unfortunately aren't catching it in time. And then they make a very public mistake, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen it. We've seen CEOs get on camera. Somebody's recorded an all hands meeting. Suddenly it's gone viral in social media. Like, to me, I think this could be a real consequence of that isolation. Thoughts on how to coach any CEO out there listening right now going, yeah, it is hard. I am alone and they're not helping my situation. What do you think about that?
Mark, you're shaking your head, so I'll let you go. It looks like you got an idea in your head.
Yeah, I am such a back to basics kind of guy. If the CEO has the proper set of core values, there is not a single question or confrontation from any employee ever that should not produce a compassionate response from the CEO. Mm-hmm. What COVID did to us was brutal. It was brutal on the employees and it was brutal on the CEO. And when the employees bark back and say, I want this and I want that, the CEO needs to receive it. It doesn't mean that it has to happen, but it has to be a thoughtful communication. And with thoughtful, kind communication, hey, if it goes viral, maybe it goes viral in the good way.
Yeah. Very interesting for you to say that. I think any CEO listening right now, if you don't feel like you could react, like you said, to any situation to be able to take it in, there's probably some reason to get some coaching here. Kirsten, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, the way you started that question was I forget what you said, but it was, they don't understand or they don't have my back. I'm like, they're not there to have your back. You are there to have their back. You are there to create an environment for them to be their best. And if there's something in the way of them being their best, like Mark said, you got to be able to receive that. And even just stand in their shoes for a minute as they're saying it, that should lower your shoulders. Mm. Just being able to hear somebody who is elevated and receive it in a calm way, that's a huge skill. Even if you can't do anything about it, if we've all seen the viral "It's Not About the Nail" video, go out there and Google that. Just having somebody feel heard is the number one skill for a CEO in my book. Doesn't
Wow.
mean you agree. It doesn't mean you can do anything about it, but damn sure you better make that person feel heard.
I love it. I love that. Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, a little reverse on this. One of the things, if you're feeling the way you're describing with these CEOs, I would suggest try to find areas, and this is up to people that work for you to help you with this. Find areas in your business that are working really well, and people that are implementing whatever your strategy or direction of the company is successfully. It'll lift you up. You'll go down, okay, things are working. There are areas that are working well. Talk to those employees about what's working. And so I think the reverse, instead of getting so overwhelmed and frustrated and upset and then feeling isolated, I would go the other way and say, where in the organization are we really winning and doing well? It could be the smallest part of the company, it could be anything, but just look there, talk to people that are working in that area and understand why it's working so well. It'll lift you up and make you feel like, okay, things aren't completely astray. Maybe I can learn from this. I think that would be one way, from my experience, that would be helpful to people that are running, whether it's just a division, whether it's running a sales department, marketing. Go look for places where things are actually performing well. It might give you some ideas, might lift you up and get you out of that isolation.
I love it. And I want to share a fantastic comment from Aaron, one of our listeners today. Another part is to understand that apart from being a giver of direction and leadership, you are also a receiver of people's perspectives and expertise by giving space to receive and to simply listen. I think it's a beautiful recap of what all of you have been talking about here. I want to give you one final question, though, because something came up here. Our LinkedIn listener said today, at times, a CEO's directive is not always followed due to a misunderstanding. And then a response from the CEO to middle managers can be punitive. What kind of unintended consequences can ensue from this? Any thoughts on that?
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Well,
Mark, dive in.
yeah, when a mistake is made, it needs to be called out, but it needs to be called out without judgment, without condemnation. Punitive, I hear the tone of that, but a mistake is a mistake. But if it's not, if the organization isn't doing 3-to-1, 5-to-1 of identifying the successes and the things that are going right, then identifying a mistake and calling it out, it doesn't balance out. And it can destroy the company. So I guess the answer is find all the good and talk about it. And when there's something wrong, fix it and talk about it.
Yeah, I love that. Kirsten, thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with Mark. When your environment is positive enough, the one or two outlying mishaps are not going to be, they're going to be an opportunity for learning, and they're not going to be punitive. So overall, you need to rise the tide of positivity. If you have multiple misunderstandings, then we need to talk about communication, clarity. Perhaps we are only, from our previous conversation we've had here online, we're only talking to people about what to do and how to do, and not why we're doing something, right? And giving people the purpose of an activity or a mission, and we're only telling them what to do and how to do it. And that's always going to lead to misunderstandings.
I love it. Mike, what do you think? Your experience with giving negative feedback without it being punitive?
Yeah, I find everybody in a leadership team either is a firefighter or in the fire prevention business. And I would try to find whoever is in the firefighting business to try to stop something happening that's punitive, because they're very good at it. They have a relationship maybe with the CEO, and they can discuss it with them in a way that will be less punitive or take the issue off the table, or go to the fire prevention people that can make sure those things never happen in the first place. And my experience is every company has those people. You got to identify them and help you figure out how best to navigate those situations.
Love it. Folks, this has been an incredible topic. First of all, thank you to all of you with your comments, your conversation, very lively today. More importantly, I'm going to say it, I tell them every time, I feel super honored and privileged to have the three of you on here. I think people don't understand what it's like to have three very accomplished CEO coaches here sharing their time and wisdom. Folks, find and follow them here on LinkedIn. Their names are here for a reason. jot them down, go follow them. They're dropping regular knowledge bombs. I got nothing else to say other than follow their feeds. You're going to learn a lot from each one of them. And better yet, reach out, ask them to connect. Tell them you saw them on CEO Table Talk, though, so they know where you're coming from, okay? Until next time, remember, if you want to win, you got to work it daily. Head on over to workitdaily.com, sign up for our free newsletter, and that's how we will notify you about all the amazing upcoming table talks like CEO Table Talk in the future, okay? All right, until next time, everyone, take care. Good luck. Go get them.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you, JT.